This time it's guns to...
Welcome to Hunting Humbug with me, Theo Clark, one of the co-authors of the book Humbug, The Skeptic's Field Guide to Spotting Fallacies, and I'm joined with my co-author and father, Jeff Clark.
G'day, Theo.
Okay, for our first little thing, I thought we'd obviously just start in with a general kind of chat about what is humbug and why we kind of got into hunting it. And then obviously as it develops later on, we do a few more of these little audio podcasts. We can talk in more specific details about some of the different fallacies we've identified and we like to talk about and spot. But yeah, first of all, I thought I'd just say how we've defined or the definition of humbug, which is deceptive talk or false behaviour, and talk a little bit about where you saw the need for introducing humbug to your student, introducing the idea of spotting fallacies to your students. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that, Dad?
Yeah, I mean, it was often the case that I'd read a student essay and they'd know that somebody was writing something that was suspect, and they could say it was suspect just on an instinctive level, but they couldn't name a fallacy. I'd been brought up in my university education on common fallacies, and so I decided I needed to give them some background in naming these fallacies, because once you can discover the particular kind of fallacy, you have a stronger argument for saying it's a fallacy rather than just a sort of gut level instinct. So that was the reason I was interested in giving my students some skills in hunting down particular fallacies.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the main things is the actual articulation of it. But I also think then when you have understand there's those specific different categories of bad arguments people can put forward, it then kind of hones your skills and you actually get better at spotting it as well. So it's not just it's a kind of a positive feedback loop. And I mean, I suppose that's the same with anything. The more you practice, the better you get at it. So it's not just a matter of just being able to articulate it better, but it's also a matter of once you've had your consciousness kind of raised to the idea that there are these things called fallacies, then you can actually start to you get certainly you radar in on them, zone in on them more, and you get an idea of when you hear a pattern of speech and you think that's sounding pretty dodgy, and you can actually pick out those specific things, and you can know which the actual evidence they're looking for an argument or evidence they're hiding and those kinds of things.
Yeah, the other thing about it is that, and which we shouldn't lose sight of, is it's actually fun. That if you're watching a television program and somebody's pontificating about something, and previously you might just say, oh, that's crap, no one believes that and so on, but you can actually name the type of humbug. And I'm thinking, for example, when we started developing our ideas and listing these fallacies, I can remember sitting watching TV together and we both sort of identified the particular fallacy at the same time. So it's a good basis for, rather than being a passive recipient of information from, say, the media like newspapers and television and so on, you are an active critic of the information that's coming through to you, and you know when somebody's on shaky ground. And you also tend to refine your own arguments, so it helps you. Hunting humbug is hunting other people's humbug, but also you can hunt your own humbug in the sense that you can look at your own powers of persuasion and powers of analysis and that sort of thing and improve your own skills.
Well, that's one of the things I think we emphasised in the book. The whole point of the book is it's a really small book, so wasn't a book on critical thinking or how to structure an argument or how to write an argumentative essay. It was about how to identify fallacies, but I think we might have even used the metaphor of a sculptor with a statue, and you cut away all the dodgy bits and you're left with the image of what you actually want on the outside. And so I think it actually is a shortcut in a way to learning some of those skills. I mean, obviously, if you say writing an essay, you need to be able to write in the first place, and you should have some idea about how to structure a paragraph and things like that. But in order to actually make a decent argument, you should, obviously, if you're trying to make an honest and decent argument, be able to dodge making fallacious statements, which kind of is just one of the things we probably didn't talk about a little bit, but what actually is a fallacy. And I think the best kind of simple-minded definition I know is it's just where an argument has gone wrong. And so it could either be deliberate or it could be accidental as well. And I think a lot of the time it is just accidental, and there are some people who then deliberately use arguments they know are dodgy, so using them in bad faith, which will be a fallacy we talk about later on. And also it's something that can be quite a part of that, getting back to that being fun. If it's not actually a kind of something that's really important, then actually arguing in bad faith can be fun, and using fallacies for evil can be fun as well. And I think you told me an anecdote or something where you talked about that with a student before, so I thought maybe you want to reiterate that one for us.
Well, I think the most outrageous example, and I hope this is not disclosing too much about you to the web, but the most outrageous.
It was at this point in the conversation there was some kind of strange interference, and unfortunately the anecdote about my devious behaviour couldn't be recorded, and so we'll pick up the conversation from just after that point in time where the interference mysteriously disappeared. Back up any claim.
I was going to say making up statistics and also making up authors, and we'll get onto that in one of our other discussions.
Faith,
but false attribution, bad faith. If you just mention an author in a discussion to back up your position, the other person discussing it with you, the issue with you, is not in a position to check up on the author, so they have to take it in good faith, but in fact it's in bad faith.
Yeah. Of course, then if someone ever does that to you, the first thing to do is say, oh yeah, where can I get a copy of that? Can you send me the link to it? That normally can put the pressure right back on them. But of course, that's the whole point. Being aware of that is the key point as well.
It hadn't occurred to me, but actually a good way to get going on a discussion where you're sincerely interested in arriving at a closer approximation of the truth. If a couple of people are in a room discussing an issue, if you've both got a notebook connected to the internet, you can actually check in real time. It's not something I've thought of, but you can actually check in real time their sources and that kind of thing. So, it's all to the good that because information is so readily available nowadays, isn't a lot of it's junk, that you can explore these issues much more efficiently than in the past.
Well, I mean, the main problem with that, of course, is people just will look at one particular study or one particular source and act as if that's some kind of arbiter of truth, when, of course, especially in, say, science, that's not how it works. You've got to have a body of evidence over time, and people don't actually understand that either, and that's, of course, not necessarily a fallacy. That's just a general principle of how science works. And that can work in social science too, except it's a lot harder to glean the wheat from the chaff in social science. But we can probably do a post all about social science at some stage in the future too. But the other thing I wanted to talk about was one of the main things we talk about in the introduction to the book, which is about the two important questions, which is what are you saying and why do you think that's true? And that was, to me, that's just the basics of any kind of course in philosophy, which would be about meaning and justification. And I think that can actually be the main problem in any kind of argument you might be having with somebody, and where, of course, fallacies occur all the time, is that people they're not clear about what they're saying, and also the person who's listening isn't making sure they actually understand what their opponent's views are. And then they're also not necessarily justified in what they believe, and the justification is more where the fallacies specifically come into play, except of course with fallacies like gibberish and so on, where the what are you saying is not clear. But if you're genuinely a seeker after truth, which is one of the terms that we are very fond of using, so I'm actually using identifying fallacies for good, which is the truth seeking. And truth seeking doesn't mean that you guarantee you get to the truth. It's just a state of mind or a habit of mind where there are no sacred cows, and you're just simply interested in trying to certainly get rid of the erroneous beliefs and then try to arguably get closer and closer to the truth. And I think that's a habit of mind, and I think those two, if you can take away two questions, certainly from our book and the blog, it's what are you saying and why do you think that's true? I thought if you wanted to add anything on that one there.
Well, the thing that we've come up with in discussion before is just how refreshing it is to be able to discard an incorrect idea. So most people in arguments, they get their ego is bound up with the particular position they take. But if you see yourself as a seeker after truth, you're not threatened by having your argument challenged, because the next time you're in an argument with someone else, if the argument you're having at the moment can actually refine your ideas, clarify your ideas, and in fact, if you are holding an incorrect idea and it's pointed out to you, it shouldn't be a threat to your ego. It should be a point of satisfaction that you can change your ideas.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the most difficult things for people to understand about. So, I mean, now that we should probably do a whole podcast, little audio on what does it mean to be a skeptic. And a part of that is people think it's such a negative kind of philosophy, but to me it's an extremely positive one in that you withhold your belief on something until you have some kind of decent evidence towards it. And you're open-minded to different beliefs. You just are asking for some kind of evidence for it. And then you certainly don't take that belief personally in that, I mean, given that most people haven't actually come up with the beliefs they have themselves in the first place, I mean, that's the thing that I find really strange is most of the time when unless you're the scientist or the philosopher who came up with the thing in the very first place, you're just reiterating someone else's point. So why are you getting so hung onto it that you find it so offensive to be shown to be wrong? And I suppose it's probably even the language we use in terms of ownership of beliefs. You know, you've gathered a belief, or you've appropriated someone else's belief, or the belief is yours. So the ownership issue into it, and so it's even written into our language. So it's obviously a deeply ingrained thing, but it's almost a I don't know, Buddhist or Zen or something position where you can separate yourself from the actual idea itself and not be too upset. And so I suppose actually the idea that we do have ownership of is the idea of the way to think about things. And so because we have ownership of how to think about things, we're kind of immune to being offended by the actual end result being shown to be incorrect, because that's not what we actually are passionate about. I'm not passionate about for example, Newton's theory of gravitation, whether it works or not. I'm passionate about science and the methods of science. And so if someone comes along and shows, for example, say they don't find the Higgs boson with a Large Hadron Collider coming up, that's awesome. And if they do find it, that's also awesome, because I'm not interested so much in the answer. It's more the question that is far more important. I think it was Voltaire who said, judge a man, excuse his sexist pronoun, by his questions, not by his answers. And that was one of those, quotations you hit, just was a smack in the head for me, because it was just rang so true. And especially disassociating your ego from it is the number one thing, I think.
Yeah, I think disassociating ego is often seen as a difficult task by people, but I think it's actually you're emotionally cool. So when we say hunting humbug, the metaphor is, if people take hunting as a kind of aggressive pursuit and so on, it is in a sense that you're
it's also a
directed
sport,
towards.
Yeah.
It's a sport, but it's cool reason. I like to think of a debate or a discussion being conducted with cool reason rather than heated emotions, because cool reason will get you there to a closer approximation of the truth. Hot emotion will just get you to defend entrenched positions. And
well, I don't think you can take the emotion out of it. What I think the emotion does, the emotion is the driving force behind you wanting to do it in the first place. So it's the motivating factor. But then you've got to say to yourself, well, what do I actually care about? Do I care about trying to get to the truth or not? And then if you care about trying to get to the truth, you've got to take the emotion out of it to make an informed and logical and evidential decision. And so that's the key difference. So our emotions pick and choose what we're interested in. And so, for example, you might be interested in looking at, psychology, or you might be interested in looking at ghost phenomena, or you might be interested in UFO phenomena, that kind of thing. And that's fine. But there's two types of people that look at that. There's the true believers who don't care about the evidence. They just care about the emotional thrill they get from it. And there are the ones who are just as driven and interested in it, but they actually want to know whether it's true or not. And so to do that, you've got to get your emotion out of the judgment of the evidence. And that's completely clear when you look at things like, say, dowsing or something like that, where people go and decide to have a look at it scientifically and do a double-blind test, and as soon as they do, it's shown to be nothing more than just the ideomotor effect or placebo or just random chance, that kind of thing. But because people are so emotionally attached to the idea of it, they can't accept that and they can't move on. And I think that's probably one of the number one lessons for hunting humbug.
Look, the other thing, Theo, is that you know me very well, and as I've been talking about dispassionate argument and cool reason, you know that I'm something of a hypocrite. In fact, I'm a bubbling cauldron of emotion during arguments, but I never show it to the person I'm talking to.
That's right.
I prefer to leave the discussion, as a cool, rational being, and then on my way home, I just key the Duco of their car on my way out, or their tyres down.
Hang on a sec. I've got some key marks on my car.
Oh, no, that wasn't me. That was
we never argue. We agree on everything. Yeah.
That was another psychopath.
All right, good. Oh, okay. Yeah, look, well, just to finish off, I think it's one of the posts I did on the blog was specifically called Fallacy, and I draw the distinction between an opinion and an argument. And I think a lot of the time people just make an opinion. And where people can go wrong in identifying fallacies is they actually try and say someone's made a fallacy when they haven't. And it'll be something we'll talk about later on in more detail too, but a fallacy only actually occurs when someone is making an argument, and an argument basically has to have some kind of premise and conclusion. And whereas an opinion is just someone's belief in something. I believe this because I believe it. And in that case, you can just dismiss it out of hand. You don't even need to entertain it. I mean, if someone's not going to give you a reason for what they believe, for why they believe something, well, it's essentially worthless. That's just their belief. So that's what I call an opinion. Of course, it depends how you define these things, but that's how I certainly use the word opinion, because I think it's useful to draw a distinction between that and an argument. And an argument is someone's opinion, but with a reason behind it. And they can be fallacious when their reason behind it is dodgy or deliberately misleading. And so that's certainly a post to go and have a look at, where I talk about the differences between those two things. And some of the things we talk about are not specifically fallacies in that the argument's bad. They could just be a devious technique people use to try and win, so moving the goalpost or something like that. That's more of a devious technique.
I think you coined the term invincible ignorance for people who
that was one of my mates,
essentially, but they're essentially full of opinions.
Absolutely.
Without any reasoning behind them, so their opinions will remain the same no matter what evidence is put in front of them.
Yep. Yeah, well, we use the term simple-minded certitude, which is essentially the same, although I think invincible ignorance means you've got to give up as well, whereas simple-minded certitude, you probably think you might still have a chance with them. But yeah. Absolutely, and I think that's the key distinction to make is if it's just an opinion, well, you can just ignore it. You can say, well, that's your opinion, and you've given me no reason for that, so there's no reason why I should believe you. Whereas if you want to give me some kind of evidence, that's the difference. And if you understand fallacies, then you can look at their reason and see, is the link between what their evidence is and what their conclusion is that justifiable? And if it's not justifiable, it's probably because they've made some kind of fallacy. All right, then. I think we'll leave it at that, and we will continue our conversations. We'll try and do it weekly, and until next time, I hope you have a nice week, and I'll talk to you later.
Okay.